Hi everyone, welcome to week number 4. This week we are dealing with the medical law and ethics chapter. So that's going to be actually part of chapter 3 and part of chapter 8. But I really want you to make sure that you read all of those chapters to have a better understanding as the wide variety of chapter 3 and chapter 8. But let's start off with chapter 3. And this is really dealing with EMR and the laws that go along with EMR. And when I say EMR, what I'm talking about is that electronic medical record, okay? And there are many laws that are going to affect the medical records, but it's important that you really know your federal, state, and your federal and state guidelines. One of the big things that you're going to come in contact with is HIPAA. And that's, again, the most common one that you will see in any medical office. And that's really dealing with privacy and the medical laws that go with medical records. HIPAA was created in 1996, and HIPAA stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. So make sure that when you're spelling out that acronym, you're actually doing that correctly, because some people like to forget that it's HIPAA, and they like to spell it HIPPA. HIPAA has 7 subdivisions that have every one of them have their own title, but we really want to focus on title number 2. That title has the greatest impact over medical records. The title encourages the use of EMR because it's more honestly, it's a better way of doing your records. It's easily accessible to all parties, and it's even very easily accessible to our patients, which is what we want. The most important privacy rule that we'll deal with is security and protecting of patients' privacy and their health data with EMR. And you also want to ensure that PHI and IIHI are protected. So PHI, what we're talking about, is personal health information or patient's health information. And when we talk about the IIHI, that's the individually identified health information. HIPAA puts accountability on those who have access to the patient's chart. It puts a lot of accountability on you because we can track, where you go, whose chart you're in, and did you have a reason to be in that chart, okay? The key provision of the privacy laws include accessing medical records. So patients should have access to their own medical records, and they should be able to see if there's an error, and it should be corrected in a reasonable amount of time. Notice of privacy practices is another privacy protection, and that's just a document saying that how your medical records will be used and how we plan to use our patient's medical records. That's something that they need to sign every year, and it's generally going to be able to include, us sending out their personal information, maybe to other doctors or to specialists. So we need to make sure that we have that signed each year. But it's also important for when we're sharing information with family members, especially those who are not powers of attorney or have been appointed as a power of attorney. You also want to limit the personal use of medical information, so you really should not be doing outside business on your work computers. It doesn't bode well, and it can be kind of traced back to you, so please make sure that you're only doing business-related things on your computer at work. It prohibits on marketing, so you can't really use patients' information to market anything unless you have their permission. Maybe you want to share their story as a promoting or a marketing tip, but you really need to get the patient's approval of that first. And then the last two are having stronger state laws and having confidential communications. So again, don't have conversations about patients in elevators or hallways when other patients can hear that. I also want to talk about some of the penalties of HIPAA. So we understand now what the regulations are, but what are the penalties if you break HIPAA? So you can end up with fines of anywhere from $100 to $250,000, and you can also face prison or jail time anywhere from 1 to 10 years. So it's really important that you understand that HIPAA is not just something that we talk about in class. It's a real thing. It's very important, and your sentencing and your fines can vary depending on the number and the type of violation. So again, confidentiality issues are very serious, and please make sure that you take those into consideration when you're talking about patients. Make sure you keep their privacy and their information confidential. Don't access any records without cause to do so, even if it's your mom or your niece or your next door neighbor and they're like, oh, I go to Dr. So-and-so, he works in your building, can you just check on my results? You can't do that. They're not your patient, you have no right to be in that chart, and it can come back to kind of bite you in the bum. So that's kind of Chapter 3 in a nutshell. I want to talk about Chapter 8. So Chapter 8 is really dealing with our special needs individuals and our special needs patients, and making sure that we're being compliant with them as well, and looking at those laws that are required and put in place for our special needs patients. So one of the big things that you'll hear when we talk about special needs is the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act. That was established in 1964 as part of the Civil Rights Act, and it really deals with patients who have special needs. Now, when we talk about patients with special needs, it's not just the ones that you normally think of, hearing impaired or vision impaired. It also goes along with veterans. They have special needs as well, along with different race, color, and sex. We can't discriminate against them. And national origin or religion. We can't really discriminate against those people just because they don't go with what we believe in, okay? The Act is really a foundation regarding procedures for patients with disabilities. Again, those can include hearing impaired or deaf, speaking impaired, physical limitations, physical impairments or blind, or mental impairments with disabilities. So speaking impairments could be, I don't speak English very well, or maybe English isn't my first language. So don't just think of speaking impairments as I don't know how to communicate with you. It could be just about anything, okay? I want to talk about each of those disabilities and the laws regarding them. So when we talk about laws regarding hearing impaired or those that are deaf, really what we put in place was a way to communicate with those people, whether it be that we bring in an interpreter or we provide other auxiliary devices, such as maybe a TTY, or a TTY is a teletypewriter, which can translate what we're saying into Braille so the patient can understand it, or a telecommunications device for the deaf. So sometimes we'll have to call a patient, and that system will actually kind of translate it so the patient can read it on the computer, which is really nice. Or we have an interpreter or a signer that comes in and can communicate as well. Be very cautious with that if it's not somebody who's hired by the system, because sometimes they can bring someone who can sign to them, but is our message really being relayed? That's the kind of parts that we kind of trip up with. And then for the laws that for the sight impaired or the blind, we actually put things in motion in most newer offices, where all of our entrance signs, exit signs, elevator buttons, our bathroom signs all have Braille on them, so that way our patient can actually be able to physically read without having to use the use of their eyes. So most buildings that you'll go into now have that, but you also have to be allowed to let service animals in for patients who have disabilities that require them. I've been in a situation before where a patient is blind in one eye and she had a seeing eye dog. It comes in the room, but you have to remember that dog is on the job, so you can't treat it like you would a normal dog, okay? Then we're going to talk about laws for persons with physical disabilities. So in 1992, all new public buildings and commercial facilities had to put in ramps. And that was something that was designed by the ADA Standards of Accessible Design. So they had to have ramps, an adequate number of parking spaces for handicap, They had to have wider elevators, doorways, and hallways to get wheelchairs through. You also had to lower the service counters so patients could see you and you didn't have to step up and over the counter. And you also had to have handicap bathroom stalls that were wider and could fit the wheelchair into them so that way patients could use those as well. Okay? And one of the last ones is the laws for patients with limited English proficiencies. So again, this is where we're talking about English maybe isn't their first language. But this actually falls under Title VI of the Civil Acts right. So it requires entities receiving federal assistance from the Department of Health and Human Services to provide interpreters. So maybe it's a Spanish-speaking interpreter, but again, it's the same thing as having somebody who's a signer. Make sure that they are hired in by your system, so that way you make sure that your message is being put through clearly. So some of the methods that were put in place are, hiring people who are bilingual or multilingual. That's a great asset for you guys, and if you are, you need to make sure that's on your resume, because that's very sought after nowadays. Also, hiring staff members who can interpret. Using interpretation services, again, those are put in place by your facility already. You just have to know how to access them. And also making sure that your brochures and other pamphlets are in multi-languages, because not everyone is going to speak English, or maybe that's not their first choice for speaking in language, so you have to make sure that those are in different languages according to the areas that you live and work in. Okay. Alright, so that's Chapter 8 in a nutshell, and Chapter 3 in a nutshell. What I want to kind of point out to you guys this week is I really do suggest that you read those chapters thoroughly. Make sure that you understand all parts of them, because you're going to have a quiz this week. It's going to be your first quiz, and that's going to go over medical law and ethics. Now don't panic, we will do a review in class, so I would suggest waiting until after class to really take that quiz so you have a better understanding of what the questions will be like. And your quiz will be due on Sunday at midnight, just like your written assignment will be due Sunday at midnight, okay? Also this week you'll see that we have a lab activity tab in your Angel platform. Don't print anything, I will take care of all that, and we will really kind of discuss that and go over those activities in the lab this week. And last thing to kind of round it out is, remember, don't forget your discussion post is due on Tuesday. Your 2 responses are due on Saturday. Alright everyone, I will see you on Wednesday. Have a wonderful week.